The entire computer ships in this box. 32 gigabytes of memory, a terabyte of storage, and a discrete GPU. You can game at over 100 FPS at 1080p on this, and it can run 4 displays. It's got USB 4, it's expandable. Minisforum, the HX100G. This is an update to the model that we reviewed previously. Let's take a closer look. In the box, you get a giant power brick, the Minisforum unit itself, and a handsome stand. You can use it in a desktop configuration like this. It actually doesn't breathe from the bottom. It only breathes from the top and sides. And it comes with a cool carbon fiber looking stand. It all mounts together, and that'll hold it in the vertical orientation. And it comes with the screws to be able to do that as well. This has a 6650M with 8 gigabytes of GDDR6, and this particular one is a 7840HS, so this is the highest end laptop configuration. All told, this can consume north of 200 watts of power, but for 1080p and 1440p gaming, even 1440p 60 FPS in most titles is attainable. This is pretty impressive. 8 gigs of VRAM, I mean, 8 gigs of VRAM is probably the biggest argument against it, but in terms of the value proposition, aside from the lack of expandability, this might actually make more sense than a desktop PC. If you treat your machines kind of as disposable, it's like I'm going to do major upgrades every couple of years, this is retailing for around $700–800 US. It depends on the configuration. You can bring your own RAM and storage, you can get a different CPU, but a 6650M is pretty good. It's pretty good as far as GPUs go. You're going to be able to play Baldur's Gate at 100 FPS. You're going to be able to play Starfield at 100 FPS. It depends on if you want something higher end than that. It depends on if you want to play a game that requires more VRAM. Higher end games might require medium textures, especially in the future as we move into the post 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM world. Maybe, maybe not. This might be good enough from now until the end of time for casual gaming or anything like that, because it is 8 cores and 16 threads with that 7840HS processor. I was really impressed with the predecessor from Minisforum, and this is basically the same configuration, same updates, and some lessons learned. Let's take a look at the I/O. We have 3.5mm analog audio out on the front. That is a headset and a microphone connector. Okay, reasonable. We have a Type-C port, and we have a Type-A port. Those are just regular USB. At the rear, we've got 2 HDMI. They'll drive 4K 60. You also have 2 USB-C. Those are USB 4. You can run Thunderbolt peripherals with this? Yeah, technically those are not Thunderbolt ports, but they are PCIe tunneling, and so that works pretty well on this platform. I took a look at that before, and things have improved somewhat. Now it is 2024. Should this be an 8000 series mobile processor? Not necessarily. AMD has this sort of blended approach that they're doing, where people are still shipping a lot of 7000 series based mobile processors. Minisforum has 7 and 8000 series based processors, but this one is the high power, high TDP version, and they basically put it in a desktop replacement configuration. In desktop replacement at 200 watts, this CPU doesn't make sense for a laptop. Well, only the most bulbous and unwieldy laptops, perhaps. This is from Minisforum, the Neptune series, and this has been one of the variations on a theme that Minisforum has done with mini PCs that people have been most happy with. The expandability internally, not really a lot has changed. It's a dual fan design, a dual M.2, so you can add a second M.2 for additional storage, whatever, without formatting or erasing your operating system drive. The noise profile on this hasn't changed much since the previous model, meaning that when you're gaming, you can hear the fan, but it does, but I would say it's not a loud and whiny fan. You're going to be spending a lot more for not a lot more performance on desktop. I mean, yeah, this is going to be a little slower than a 7000 series desktop CPU with a 7000 series desktop class processor from AMD. This, in this package, as quiet and powerful as it is very, very impressive that this is where we are with mobile parts. Really, the thing that's holding us back on mobile is power, because 200 watts in a laptop doesn't make sense. That's really down to heat dissipation and battery life, I suppose, but yeah, this is incredibly impressive at the power envelope that we're talking about here to get this level of performance. I mean, I would not know that this is made out of mobile parts if we were just doing a blind playthrough in Baldur's Gate at 1080p. These lend themselves really well to modding projects as well. So what happened to my old one? It's in here. You can play Super Nintendo games on it, but it was pretty pretty receptive to being able to reroute the connections, dual HDMI plus USB 4, including the tunneling, plus 2.5 gig Ethernet. Got our power cable going into our standard issue Minisforum power brick, which as far as I can tell is unchanged. Seems identical, a GVE power brick, 262 watts. It's good stuff. And this thing, other than running a little warm because of the Nintendo shell, is a little unforgiving in terms of heat dissipation. In here, breathing from the bottom, exhausting a little bit out the sides and the back. And it really is not any larger than a Super Nintendo. Alright, as we do, let's take a look at game performance. Game performance here, we start with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Move on to Borderlands 3. Throw in some Baldur's Gate, just for fun. Also want to call out Starfield specifically. Check out this gameplay. This is shockingly good. But if I were benchmarking this, I would report a benchmark figure of about 35 FPS, which is below where I would want to play a game like Starfield. But with AMD's new Adrenalin driver and HyperRX and FSR3 features, we're able to achieve over 60 FPS solid. And playing that on a Pixio OLED monitor at over 60 FPS is a much more enjoyable experience. And it melts my brain a little bit, this small form factor is able to deliver on that. Here's a full system report from Ada64 and what we've got out of the box with our cache and memory benchmark latency. Now the DDR5 is upgradable here, you can just swap in some new memory if you want. I think Minisforum is shipping it pretty conservatively, but Minisforum also doesn't have an elaborate history of BIOS updates. This is one of the complaints that has come up in our forum, is people are looking for a little bit more longevity and a little bit more support, especially when AMD issues a Giza updates, or there are other updates like that to the platform, maybe a security update, that sort of thing. If you decide to pick up one of these, the first thing you should always do, update Windows and do a scan just to make sure nothing is on there. That's not been a problem with Minisforum that I know of, but you know, something to check. If you're really paranoid, you can do a Windows reset even before you do anything, which in 85% of cases will be good. At least it'll get you back to, you know, Windows baseline in 85% of cases. You can also do a USB installation stick, like you can literally take a Windows USB installer and reinstall. That is also an option. But really the important thing is getting your drivers. And this didn't come with the latest version of AMD Adrenalin, so I went to the AMD website and downloaded Adrenalin. Let's talk sensor data and performance information. Using Hardware Info 64 to log everything, playing games is pretty good. Actually, a thing I like to test is if you're doing rendering, like a Blender render or Cinebench run and let it run forever, ideally the system gets hotter and has worse temperatures running that than it does while you're playing games. And so I ran this for quite a while playing games, and yeah, it performs like that. I mean, in the gaming performance, the thermals are a little better than the worst case scenario performance, which tells me that the thermal solution is sized for the worst case scenario, not just gaming. Our DDR5, it's 5600. It's Micron chips from Crucial, so this is pretty bog standard. JetX speeds, the timings, nothing looks untoward here. This actually looks pretty good in terms of performance. Being mobile CPUs, another thing I was curious about, is it possible to trigger AMD's STOPM, S-T-A-P-M, the Surface Temperature Aware Power Management. Basically, is your laptop starting to get hot? Maybe don't run it so hard if your laptop is starting to get hot. This is not a laptop. This is side effects from using mobile parts and things that are not mobile. And STOPM is still showing here in Hardware Info 64, so there may be some edge case that triggers it, but in the out-of-the-box configuration, it did not trigger after 20 minutes of burn-in testing. I'm not super confident there's not still a way to trigger that, which would mean that you're just leaving performance on the table, because the cooling solution in here can definitely deal with a lot of wattage, unlike, you know, a laptop that's just going to get warm, uncomfortably warm. Now, in terms of the BIOS, Minisforum's done a good job not really locking down the BIOS, and there are STOPM options in the BIOS for controlling that. It's on auto by default, which doesn't seem to trigger in my experimentation, but it may be worthy of more experimentation. I like that you can also set the system to auto power on if it loses power. That could be awesome if you're using this as a machine in an off-label scenario and you just want it to be on all the time. Out of the box, it does disable virtualization, so you want to turn that on if you intend to run the Windows subsystem for Linux or use virtual machines. There's also some LED control if you want some RGB LED control for your machine. Not exactly the most amazing user-defined option, but hey, at least you get the BIOS option. I'm not sure where the LED actually is. It is very nice that you have full access to the AMD CBS menu and nothing's locked out. You've also got the EFI driver for the i226V. It reports it's disconnected in the BIOS even when it is not actually disconnected. I actually have link lights back here, so there's some minor issue there. But you can also net boot with the EFI module, so that's welcome. If you get creative, you can net boot and iSCSI and all that kind of stuff. Not EFI support for iSCSI, but just fancy network stuff. And that and the USB 4, you might be able to build a fancy little cluster out of these. And the bundled NVMe reveals itself as a Kingston OM8 PGP 41024Q. So 1TB Kingston OEM model. But yeah, mini PCs are fun. I'm Woodless Level 1. I'm signing out, and you can find me in the Level 1 forums.